Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in for our Tuesday Fireside Chat. Um, this Sunday, we're going to begin a new series on the book of Ecclesiastes. Was planned probably 6 months ago to start a series on Ecclesiastes after Easter 2020. Didn't know then just how appropriate Ecclesiastes would be for the moment that we are in. But I want to encourage you to take some time this week to read through Ecclesiastes, become familiar with it. It is a book that often is avoided in preaching because it is a somewhat notorious, difficult book to preach for various reasons. One of those reasons is that it's a bit of a confusing message, right? So it seems at times that the author of Ecclesiastes is despairing of all meaning. Let me just read the opening lines here. Ecclesiastes 1, 1 and 2. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And there are times throughout the book of Ecclesiastes where it feels like he's virtually a nihilistic philosopher, just despairing of all meaning and purpose. Everything's futile. I'm going to make the case throughout this series that we should not take that word vanity to mean meaningless. Okay? If you have an NIV, that's how the NIV translates it. I'm going to make the case that we should not translate that word meaningless. But I do want to encourage you to take some time to dig into Ecclesiastes and spend some time thinking for yourself, what might he mean by that word vanity? Why does he repeat it so often throughout the book of Ecclesiastes? Why does he attribute virtually everything in life to vanity? So that's challenge number one. And I think what we're going to find is actually the opposite of how it's often taken. So the title of this whole series is Everything Matters. Everything Matters. So contra the viewpoint that Ecclesiastes is kind of a case saying nothing matters, I'm going to say Ecclesiastes actually is telling us the opposite, that everything matters, but we only understand its significance and its purpose when we see it in light of the gospel. And so that brings us to the second challenge of Ecclesiastes, and that is, where do we see Christ in the book of Ecclesiastes? If you have been at Lake Morton for any period of time, you know that anytime I preach a series on the Old Testament, I always begin by highlighting the fact that we as Christians cannot preach the Old Testament in a way that would make a Jewish rabbi comfortable, right? So if a rabbi could preach the same sermon as me from the Old Testament, I've not actually preached a Christian sermon, because the point of every sermon from every pulpit in a church that proclaims the gospel is to point to Christ and to proclaim Christ. And that is true whether we are in the Gospel of John, or whether we are in the book of Genesis, or in the book of Ecclesiastes. Wherever we are, the point is to preach Christ. And so the question is, in what way does Ecclesiastes point us to Christ? Again, I want to encourage you to just spend some time thinking about that. In good Ecclesiastes fashion, I'm not going to answer that question right now. Ecclesiastes loves to throw questions at us that it does not answer, or maybe doesn't answer in the straightforward way that we would like. And so in keeping with that form, I'm going to throw that question out to you. I will answer it in the sermon this Sunday. The last point of the sermon is actually how Ecclesiastes points us to Christ, or how we see Christ in the book of Ecclesiastes. But I want to encourage you to think about it. I think it's valuable to wrestle with questions like that, especially in a book like Ecclesiastes, where we don't have clear messianic prophecies the way we do in the Psalms or in Isaiah or other parts of the Old Testament. And so we have to think more carefully about how Ecclesiastes fits into the flow of redemptive history, and how it is pointing us to the culmination of redemptive history in the person and work of Jesus. So spend some time wrestling with that question this week. Let me just close today by saying, as I have been reading through Ecclesiastes and seeing the way it does describe the fleeting nature of material things, I'm doing so while processing the news from place that was home for my family and me for 11 years, Seneca, South Carolina, which just got hit with a tornado that really did just an enormous amount of damage there. And I'm awestruck and sobered looking at the pictures of what happened there. And so I'm processing this reality of these structures. There's a big factory there that was just torn to shreds. I'm struck with the visual reminder that everything really is fleeting. It's dust in the wind. It's a vapor, a mist, and I'm connecting that to friends and people who I know who are living in the midst of that right now, who are already dealing with a pandemic and quarantine and all of that. So aside from just connecting it to what we're going to be looking at in Ecclesiastes, I would just ask for your prayers. If I could make a personal request, that you would pray for the people of the upstate of South Carolina, particularly those living in the Seneca, Clemson area. They've been hit with a really devastating tornado that has done an enormous amount of damage. Thankfully, only one death that we know of at this point, but a lot of people's lives were really thrown into upheaval as a result of this. So I would just ask if you would pray with me for God's provision and for His glory to shine in the midst of this really dark season for them. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm really excited about this Ecclesiastes series. And again, take some time to read through this book. It doesn't take long to read through it. 12 short chapters. Read through it, pray over it. Ask God to begin to reveal to you why this book is such an important part of His canon and His revelation of Himself to us. Until then, I will see you later. Have a great week.